The case of Matthew Winkler reveals the hidden secrets of a religious family. Sometimes, the most horrific and unexpected crimes occur in families that appear perfect on the surface. Even the most seemingly prosperous family units can face crises that go unnoticed by outsiders but deeply affect the members, ultimately leading to tragedy. In the town of Selmer, the Winklers were regarded as a model family. The young pastor, his wife, and their 3 daughters appeared happy, enjoying a comfortable life with health and success. Yet, as the saying goes, still waters run deep. This case left many questions unanswered, as only one version of events came to light. The story became the basis for the book Sex and Murder, Secrets of a Pastor. On March 22, 2006, the small town of Selmer, Tennessee, was shaken by terrible news. Matthew Winkler, a 31-year-old pastor, was found brutally murdered in his home, while his wife Mary and their daughters, 8-year-old Patricia, 6-year-old Maria Eliza, and 1-year-old Brianna, vanished without a trace. That day, the Church of Christ preacher missed the evening service he was scheduled to attend with his family. This unusual absence raised suspicions, as Matthew was known for his reliability and would not have missed an event without notifying someone. The family's failure to answer their phones heightened concerns. Alarmed, community members went to the Winklers' home to check if something was wrong. From the outside, everything appeared normal. The house showed no signs of damage and nothing seemed out of place. Inside, there were lights on in several rooms, and they could hear a television playing quite loudly in one of the rooms. It gave the impression that the owners of the house were busy doing their own thing. The front door was locked, but no one answered the knock. Phone calls also went unanswered, and through the curtained windows, it was impossible to see what was going on inside or if anyone was there. However, even though the whole situation was quite strange, no one was in a hurry to call the police. Instead, a call was made to an elder of the religious community who advised them to look for a spare key and open the door themselves. It took another hour and a half, and when members of the community were finally able to get inside the house, they found an eerie scene. Everything in the house was in its place. There was no sign of intruders, but the owners were nowhere to be seen either. Everything seemed normal until the visitors looked into the marital bedroom. There on the floor, in a pool of his own blood, lay the pastor's body. There was a huge hole in his back from a gunshot wound. Blood splattered everywhere and bloody foam dried on his face. By then, the body had already cooled and stiffened. It was obvious that Matthew had been lying there for many hours and had probably been killed in the morning because he was dressed in his pajamas. It was only after this that a call was made to the police. By the time the police arrived, a whole crowd of neighbors, churchgoers, and casual passersby had gathered in and around the house, interested in what was going on. All of these people had left their fingerprints at the crime scene. They left their fingerprints and shoe prints, erased or trampled possible evidence, greatly complicating the work of investigators. The police took the body for forensic examination and found that the pastor was killed by a single shot in the back fired from a large caliber weapon. He died a few minutes after the wound from massive blood loss, unable to call for help. It was simply impossible to establish definitively whether there were any strangers in the house at that time because the people who had arrived before the police arrived had literally destroyed all traces of them. The picture of the crime was quite strange, and those who could shed any light on what happened disappeared. The fate of the wife and daughters of the murdered man remained unknown. The police assumed that the woman and children could have been kidnapped or also killed. By the way, the family minivan Winklers also disappeared from the garage. A massive search was launched, and the state issued a yellow alert. This meant that children were missing, and all citizens were asked to be vigilant and assist in the search. But let's break this whole story down from the beginning. Matthew Brian Winkler was born in 1974, November 21st, in the picturesque country town of Henderson, Tennessee, and was the youngest of 3 sons of Dan and Diane Winkler. Our hero and his 2 older brothers, James and Daniel, grew up in a rather conservative Christian family. Their parents were very religious and brought up their sons in strictness and obedience. It is worth noting that Matthew became a minister of the church in the 5th generation. His father, great-uncle Michael, grandfather Wendell, great-grandfather Merlin Winkler, and great-great-grandfather Merlin Paul Winkler Sr. were all preachers of the gospel at one time. The father, to top it all off, ran the local preacher's school and was a man respected and influential in his hometown. In their younger years, the Wickler brothers attended Sunday school and were active in church activities. In addition, Matthew in high school was seriously interested in soccer, and everyone who saw his game on the field noted that he had talent, and he could well become an outstanding athlete of world renown. However, later, the young man decided to sacrifice a promising sports career in favor of Bible study and church ministry. Since the preaching activity of the head of the family was associated with frequent travel, his wife and children almost always followed him. Because of this, Matthew changed several schools in his childhood. But the active, communicative, and friendly child quickly made friends and gained authority everywhere. When the boy finished school, his family lived in a small city called Austin, located in the state of Texas. Matthew was a creative person, had a powerful charisma, but here are some outstanding achievements in studies could not boast. After graduating from high school, he entered the college Freed-Hardeman and successfully completed it. In parallel, the young man began to try his hand as a pastor under the careful guidance of his father. Matthew was the youth minister of the Central Church of Christ in the city of McMinnville. He was later appointed to the preaching position at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmer, Tennessee. Mary Carol Winkler, maiden name Freeman, was born in December 1973 in Geese Township, Tennessee, and was the oldest of 2 daughters to her parents. She was also raised in a deeply religious family with strict rules. The head of the family for many years served as a pastor in the Christian church where the girl attended Sunday school. A few years later, a second daughter was born to the family and named Patricia. Unfortunately, the girl was born prematurely and had a number of serious health problems, including cerebral palsy, encephalitis, epilepsy, and mental retardation. For many years, the parents did not want to put up with the disappointing diagnoses of the child and desperately tried to treat her, agreeing even to experimental therapy. However, it did not bring any particular improvement. Mary tenderly loved her little sister, always treated her with awe and cared for her as best she could. But in 1987, when 10-year-old Patricia was bathing in the bathtub, her older sister was only a minute away to take something from the bathing accessories. And at that very moment, the girl had another epileptic seizure. When Mary returned to the room, her sister was no longer breathing and all attempts to resuscitate her had come to nothing. For a 13-year-old girl, it was a huge shock and the first loss in her life. She blamed herself for the tragedy and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Teachers who saw the deplorable state of Mary sent her to the school psychologist, working with whom she helped. But her father, learning about what was happening, made a scandal and forbade his daughter to go to these sessions, saying that such problems are discussed only within the family. In fact, the girl never received real moral support from her parents. Mary grew up modest and quite shy. She tried to avoid any conflicts, and after the tragic death of her little sister, she became withdrawn. Since her father did not allow her to seek help from a specialist, the trauma over the years has resulted in serious psychological problems. After the death of Patricia, the parents decided to adopt a little girl named Charlotte, who was from a dysfunctional large family. Soon, the couple was also allowed to take custody of Charlotte's 2 brothers and sister, so the family was reunited in their new home. Mary was once again the older sister and took care of the younger children while helping her mother. Matthew and Mary Winkler family life. The future spouses met soon after Matthew graduated from high school. The guy was prominent, handsome, athletic, and enjoyed great popularity with the opposite sex. But to spin novels right and left, he did not allow a strict religious upbringing. The young people immediately developed a liking for each other, which quickly grew into love. For both of them, it was the first strong feeling in their lives. And after a couple of months, they met each other's parents and, having received their blessing, began to plan a wedding. In April 1994, the lovers got married. When the family had an older daughter, Patricia, the head of the family was still in college and was forced to leave school for a while. He took a job at a construction site, but long there did not last because he was not used to hard physical labor. During this period, for the first time, made himself aware of the difficult character of Matthew. He was often angry with others, irritated at small things, and sometimes he could not control his anger. But Mary tried not to complain and not to tell anyone about what was happening in her family. A meek young woman brought up in the spirit of patriarchy, obeyed her husband in everything. At first, the Winklers lived near the house of Mary's parents, so she was able to see them regularly. But soon, Mrs. Freeman was diagnosed with cancer, which rapidly progressed. And in just a few months, she literally burned from the disease. It was another shock for Mary, and the care of her underage siblings now fell on her shoulders. The situation was further complicated by the fact that Mary was pregnant again at that time. But soon after the birth of their second daughter, the family moved to another city where they bought their own small house. After the move, Mary was completely absorbed in the care of the baby and almost stopped communicating with her father, as well as with younger brothers and sisters who were too demanding and constantly needed attention. In addition, the young mother began to suffer from severe postpartum depression. Everyone who was closely acquainted with the family Winkler noted some oddities in the character and behavior of Mary. The young woman was characterized as an introvert and even sociophobic. She did not communicate with anyone. It was difficult for her to make new acquaintances, much less friendships. She suffered from mood swings, was prone to melancholy, and any little thing could bring her to tears. While Matthew was building his career as a pastor, his wife became increasingly withdrawn. The situation became even more complicated when Mary once again became pregnant, and a few months later, she learned that the fetus had died in her womb. Such news strongly shook Mary, who was looking forward to the appearance of this child and very much dreamed of a large, friendly family. Again, to see the long-awaited 2 stripes on the pregnancy test she could only 2 years later, and her happiness was unbounded. This time, Mary hid her pregnancy for a long time as if afraid of something. She did so until her situation became obvious. Once again, everyone began to talk about Mary's strange behavior and pathological reticence. The strange behavior of Mrs. Winkler was associated not only with a severe psychological trauma she suffered in childhood, but also with a very unhealthy environment within her own family, which only undermined her already unstable nervous system. The head of the family was a man of authority and demanded unconditional obedience. Despite the fact that in public, the Winklers looked like an ideal married couple where there was trust, mutual respect, and harmony, in reality, their neighbors have repeatedly heard how the husband shouted and snapped at his wife for no apparent reason. No one could even imagine that a respected pastor could raise a hand on his wife until one day Mary had a huge black eye. Despite the fact that she denied the fact of domestic violence and said that it was an accident, the city quickly spread rumors about the cruelty of a young preacher who beats the mother of his children. In addition, Matthew at some point developed an irresistible urge to experiment in bed. He offered his wife to diversify their intimate life with role-playing games, adult toys, and so on. But for Mary, brought up in strictness with conservative views, such was unacceptable. She strongly restricted her husband in this, which infuriated him, and he repeatedly tried to get what he wanted by force. One day, after another abuse in bed, Mary called her only close friend in tears and complained to her about the situation. The friend, who promised to keep her secret, immediately blobbed about everything, which provoked a new wave of rumors and gossip about the unacceptable behavior of the clergyman. At that time, Matthew was up for promotion and aspired to be a local church leader, but he was rejected because of rapidly spreading unpleasant rumors about him. Moreover, he was also removed from his position in the Sunday school, where he had brought God's word to the children and was in good standing. This was requested by the parents, who had also heard about the pastor's peculiar predilections. All this forced the family to leave their residence and move to another city where they planned to start over. They settled in Selmer, where they quickly gained the love and respect of those around them. Matthew took a job as a church pastor again, and his wife found a part-time job to make a small contribution to the family income. And although the family was still not smooth, their neighbors, as well as the congregation of the church where Matthew preached, considered Mary and Matthew an ideal couple and their family a model. Next door to the Winkler family lived a young married couple with whom the couple quickly became friends. They often visited each other, celebrated holidays together, shared news and secrets. A few months before the tragedy, During a joint dinner at the pastor's house, Mary bragged to the neighbors that her husband had bought her a gun for self-defense and had already taken her to the shooting range several times to learn how to handle it confidently. Mary turned out to be quite a capable student, quickly mastered all the subtleties, and accurately shot at targets. Moreover, it turned out that the Winklers already had firearms in the house, which had been purchased by the pastor earlier, also for self-defense. The guests wondered why the pastor and his wife needed all this because they live in a quiet town where they have no enemies, and everyone around them loves and respects their family. After another move of the couple, their financial situation left much to be desired. Mary was in search of various part-time jobs, and she also decided to get a medical degree to get a job in a clinic and help sick children. Soon, Mary decided to improve the financial condition of their family through financial fraud. She herself later claimed that she did not realize that she was doing something illegal and was going to pay back all the money as soon as she got back on her feet. What Mary was doing is commonly referred to as artificially inflating account balances. Mrs. Winkler also received checks from unspecified sources and then deposited them into a bank account she and her husband owned. She then changed the address of the account so that all communication was made up of husband-owned. She then changed the address of the account so that all communications would be routed there. The total amount of checks she received was almost $17,000, which aroused certain suspicions of the bank employees who decided to invite the couple to the office branch to clarify the circumstances and resolve the situation. But the pastor and his wife never showed up at the bank, and this aroused even more suspicion. It was assumed that Matthew was not aware of what his wife was doing at all. However, after Matthew's death, his wife tried to prove in court that the whole story of fraud was his idea and that it was he who forced her to make dubious transactions while he himself remained in the shadows without arousing suspicion. Where has Mary disappeared to? When Mr. Winkler was found murdered in his own home, his wife and daughters were put on the wanted list, fearing that they too might be in mortal danger. Initially, the meek, shy, and homely Mary was initially viewed solely as a possible victim of the crime. However, after talking to neighbors and receiving information from the bank about financial fraud, she became the main suspect in the murder of her own husband. It was necessary to find out as soon as possible where Mary had disappeared to, where the children were, and if they were all right. They, as well as their family car, were put on the wanted list. Attempts were also made to trace transactions made from Mary's bank card and to locate her location through her cell phone signal. Mary was found just a day later in an Alabama resort town where she and her children were having fun at a local amusement park. It was as if the mother wanted to give her children one last party, realizing that she would soon be going to prison and would see her girls very soon. When the family was taken to the police station to testify, the two older daughters confidently told the same story. According to them, intruders broke into the house and injured their dad, and their mom picked up a gun to protect them. They were then forced to run for their lives. According to the girls, their father was alive and in the hospital, and they were soon to go and see him and return home. What exactly happened in the house, as it turned out, Patricia and Maria Eliza did not see and learned about the events from the words of their mother. They only heard a gunshot and glimpsed their father lying on the floor, and then their mother put them in the car and they drove away. Mary almost immediately began to confess, but she claimed that she could not reconstruct the entire chain of events of that day, referring to the temporary blur. According to her, her spouse had abused her for years, humiliating her and inducing her to forms of intimacy that were unacceptable to her. Mary insisted that it was he who had initiated the financial scam she had perpetrated. Matthew demanded total obedience, easily lost his temper, and once gave the will of his fists. This was confirmed by Matthew's secretary at his previous place of employment. The woman repeatedly witnessed how the pastor insulted his wife, who carefully brought him lunch to church, but he was always dissatisfied with something. The evening before the tragedy, there was another scandal in the family because of which the spouses went to bed in separate rooms. Mary cried all night, and in the morning, she did not realize how in her hands was a shotgun, which her husband kept loaded. She entered Matthew's room and shot him in the back while he was still lying in bed. Matthew collapsed to the floor, bloody foam oozing from his mouth and nose. According to Mary, her husband, while still alive, whispered, "Why?" To which she replied, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Mary then took her daughters and left the house, and her husband, as experts have established, tried to reach for the phone to call for help, but he no longer had the strength to do so. By the way, the weapon of crime was found in the trunk of the car on which Mary left with the children. For what purpose she took it with her, Mrs. Winkler also could not answer. At the trial, the role-playing costumes found in their home were presented as evidence of the pastor's humiliation and moral abuse of his wife. Upon seeing them, Mary turned pale and then became hysterical. Despite the fact that she confused her testimony and told several different versions of what happened, the court agreed that she was the victim of a domestic tyrant, and the murder was the result of years of anger, resentment, and pain. However, this did not absolve Mary of responsibility for what she had done. In April 2007, the court delivered its final verdict in this complicated and confusing case. Mrs. Winkler was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, but her mental state raised many questions. It was originally expected that the young woman would be sent to prison for at least 6 years. But in the end, she was given a sentence of less than 1 year. She spent 2 months of that sentence in a psychiatric hospital where experts were trying to determine whether she could regain custody of her children upon release. In the summer of 2008, Mary was given sole custody of her daughters, who all this time lived with their paternal grandparents. Matthew's parents were extremely upset by this circumstance. They believed that their daughter-in-law had deliberately killed their son and suffered virtually no punishment for it, and now their granddaughters were given full custody of her. However, all their numerous attempts to file appeals had failed. As for the fraud case, it never went to trial. The bank never filed formal charges, and the whole story was dropped. The case of Anna Walsh, a chilling incident in the basement of a family home, continues to unfold. For over a year, investigators have been probing the mysterious disappearance of Anna Walsh, a young mother of 3. In January of last year, the case took a grim turn when it was reclassified as a violent crime, despite the fact that the body of the 39-year-old American woman of Serbian descent remains missing. Her husband, Brian Walsh, who had a prior record involving fraud, was arrested in connection with her disappearance. Few could have imagined that he might be responsible for the tragic fate of his children's mother. On the surface, the Walsh family appeared to epitomize success, prosperity, and happiness. The couple resided in a luxurious home and enjoyed a lifestyle of abundance. However, few knew what transpired behind the closed doors of their beautiful house. Even Anna's mother, perhaps the person closest to her, was unaware of the danger her daughter faced. Remarkably, Brian's courtship of Anna years earlier was so unconventional that it prompted Anna and her then-husband to seek police protection from his harassment and threats. Despite this troubling beginning, Anna eventually left her first husband to marry Brian, a union that lasted over 7 years. But what led this seemingly devoted husband to make the unthinkable decision to eliminate his wife? And what exactly did he do? Who was Anna Walsh, and what secrets lay beneath the surface of her life? Anna Lubisic, who later became known as Anna O'Neill following her first marriage, was born on April 18, 1983 in the Serbian capital of Belgrade. Here, she spent her formative years growing up with her younger sister in a cultured family. Her academic journey led her to the 5th Belgrade Gymnasium, where she excelled as one of its standout students. Pursuing higher education, Anna attended the esteemed Belgrade Research University, the most historic and expansive university in Serbia. Her academic pursuits included a deep dive into foreign languages, culminating in a master's degree in French language and literature. At 22, with her diploma in hand, Anna sought broader horizons and career prospects in the United States, a move fully supported by her family. In 2005, she embarked on her American dream. Settling in the U.S., Anna aimed to further her education in hospitality management. She took on administrative roles at prestigious hotels, notably the Inn at Little Washington in Virginia, a part of the elite Relais and Chateau Hotel circle. Anna's warmth, approachability, and sense of duty saw her swiftly ascend the professional ladder, garnering respect from her peers and supervisors alike. Multilingual and adept at resolving conflict, Her innate charm and charisma allowed her to form connections with ease. Beloved by colleagues and blessed with a burgeoning circle of friends, Anna seized every chance to shine. She became a U.S. citizen, retaining her Serbian nationality, enjoyed a high income, and invested in her own property and car. Her travels broadened her horizons further, and her career flourished, leading to a promotion to senior manager. Anna's intelligence, beauty, slender frame, and radiant smile attracted many admirers. During her tenure at the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts, she found love with Marcus O'Neill, the establishment's head chef. Their romance led to marriage in 2009, and Anna adopted her husband's last name. Who is Brian Walsh? Brian Paul Walsh was born in July 1975 in Boston, Massachusetts, into a well-known, affluent, and respected family. His father, Thomas Walsh, was a distinguished neurologist who worked at one of the state's leading hospitals, where he headed a department and also taught at a prestigious medical university. From a young age, Brian was the quintessential spoiled child, luxuriating in wealth and never knowing the word no. He attended one of the best private schools, wore expensive branded clothing, and lived a life of ease. Despite his parents' efforts to provide him with the best education after finishing school, he failed to stay enrolled in any of the 3 prestigious colleges his father had arranged for him to attend. Nevertheless, Brian was far from foolish. His peers remembered him as cunning, calculating, and quite aggressive. He always found a way to get what he wanted one way or another. Brian was known for his extraordinary, even obsessive desire for money and a luxurious lifestyle, and he was extremely reluctant to part with his funds. In his youth, he often borrowed money from friends only to never return it. During his college years, he would invite friends to the most luxurious restaurants, then through various schemes and manipulations, ensure that others always paid his share of the bill. For many years, Brian was estranged from his father up until the elder Walsh's death in 2018. The rift in their relationship began after the ungrateful son fraudulently withdrew nearly $1 million from Dr. Thomas Walsh's personal account and simply disappeared with the money. The father did not report his son to the police and even tried to persuade him to return the money voluntarily. When Brian refused, Thomas ceased all communication with him. By the time of this egregious theft incident, Brian's parents had long been divorced, and his father had another family and decided to permanently erase his eldest heir from his life and his will. However, when Thomas passed away, Brian immediately made his presence known and even filed a lawsuit claiming that the will left behind was forged by the doctor's widow and younger children to cheat him out of his rightful inheritance. Naturally, he was unable to prove anything or receive any part of the estate. Moreover, those who knew Brian described him as greedy, malevolent, and quite cruel, with a tendency towards violence and an inability to control his emotions. He achieved everything by force and during bouts of anger became dangerous. According to some reports, in the late 2000s, Walsh underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic where he attempted to curb his bursts of rage, and it was then that he was officially diagnosed with sociopathy, a truly peculiar love story. The future spouses met in 2014, a time when Anna was working as a senior reservation manager at the Wheatley Hotel in Massachusetts. At that moment, she was married to Marcus O'Neill, who was employed there as well. Brian was among the hotel's guests, and he was immediately taken by the attractive young woman. The fact that Anna was already married did not deter Walsh in the slightest. He began to show her attention that grew increasingly insistent. Accustomed to getting his way from a young age and not one to accept refusal, he began to pursue Anna relentlessly. He managed to obtain her phone number and even her home address where she lived with her husband, turning their lives into an absolute nightmare. In 2015, the O'Neills found themselves compelled to ask the police for protection against Brian's incessant harassment, which persisted day-night. He constantly sought out Anna, called her at work, sent messages to her personal phone, and demanded she divorce her husband to be with him. The situation escalated when Walsh threatened to harm Anna and her husband if she did not leave with him. What happened next remains unclear, including why Anna eventually changed her mind. However, a year after seeking police protection from Walsh, she unexpectedly divorced her husband. Moreover, a few months later, Brian became her second officially wedded husband. The newlyweds settled in a luxurious home in Cohasset, Massachusetts, located about 20 miles southeast of Boston, in an upscale and well-appointed neighborhood. In this marriage, they welcomed 3 sons in quick succession. The boys were born a couple of years apart, and at the time of their mother's disappearance, they were 6, 4, and 2 years old. Anna did not consider taking maternity leave and successfully juggled work with motherhood, continuing her upward career trajectory. She assumed the position of regional general manager at Tishman Speyer, a real estate company, where she earned a high salary and effectively became the primary breadwinner for the family. As her job frequently took her to Washington, D.C., she also purchased another home there, registered in her name, where she stayed during business trips. During these times, she relied on visiting nannies to help care for her children. The fraud case against Brian Walsh. What was the head of this large family doing while his wife was both expanding their family and building her career? Brian was unemployed. The $1 million he had once taken from his father was dwindling, and everything his wife acquired was wisely registered in her name. Brian was actively seeking effortless income sources. Before marrying Anna, Brian had spent some time in South Korea, where he befriended a very wealthy individual whose family owned an impressive art collection. Upon returning to the United States, Walsh maintained this connection, and his friend unexpectedly asked for his help in selling several paintings by the iconic artist Andy Warhol. Brian eagerly agreed, but decided not just to sell the artworks for a commission, but to truly profit from the transaction. He had access to a series of abstract paintings by the great artist collectively titled Shadows. He appraised each painting, obtained the necessary documentation including authenticity certificates, and then decided to create copies of both the images and the accompanying documents. Walsh approached artists who made precise replicas of the paintings. He convinced the artists that he needed these copies as a backup, since each of the original works was worth about $250,000. $1 million. For several years, the fraudster successfully copied and sold fake paintings as originals to collectors from various countries until one of his buyers, an art expert specializing in Andy Warhol's work, quickly identified a forgery and sued the fraudster. The FBI took on the investigation, and in April 2021, the suspect pleaded guilty to selling counterfeit art. He was placed under house arrest after his lawyer negotiated a deal requiring him to return the proceeds from the sale of the paintings to the buyers to avoid actual prison time. Brian's movements were significantly restricted, but he was allowed to leave his house. Twice a day, he could drive his children to and from their educational institutions. Additionally, he had 2.5 hours in the morning to visit stores, pharmacies, dry cleaners, and a few other places in his area to purchase necessities. The list of these places was limited and approved in an official document. The mysterious disappearance of Mrs. Walsh. On December 31, 2022, the Walsh family was preparing to ring in the new year together in the comfort of their home. Present were just the spouses and their 3 sons. Due to their young ages, the boys went to bed early, leaving Anna and Brian at the dinner table. That day, Anna made her last post on social media, extending her greetings and noting ambiguously that the year had been challenging. But she and her husband remained united. Anna was scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C. for work on January 3rd, but on January 4th, her employer, Tishman Speyer, reported her missing to the police. She had failed to show up for work, missed closing a crucial deal, and her phone had been unreachable for several days. Independently of Speyer's actions, her husband also reported her missing, expressing his concern that he had been unable to contact her for several days. According to Brian, he last saw Anna on January 1st. He claimed she woke him up early in the morning, saying that there were some issues at work and her boss had requested her to come in earlier than planned. After that, Mr. Walsh believed his wife headed to the airport with just a few belongings. However, inconsistencies in the case soon emerged. Firstly, Anna hadn't purchased, changed, or reserved a flight ticket for January 1st, nor had she canceled her flight scheduled for January 3rd. Secondly, she didn't appear at the airport on either January 1st or 3rd. Thirdly, how did she leave the house? Her personal car was still in the garage, and she hadn't called for a taxi. Brian suggested she might have hitchhiked, but this theory sounded far from convincing. Brian's statements and behavior raised many questions. His accounts were inconsistent, and he didn't seem particularly troubled by the unfolding events. Unable to contact the mother of his children for more than 3 days, he only reported her missing on the 4th day and only after her workplace called. Investigation and arrest of the suspect. From the outset, Mr. Walsh was considered a primary suspect, yet law enforcement lacked sufficient grounds for his arrest or a warrant to search their family home. They conducted only a cursory inspection with the homeowner's permission, which yielded nothing. Brian claimed he had been living a normal life during those 3 days, visiting usual stores and tending to household chores. However, verifying his claims proved difficult. Whenever he left the house, he forgot his phone, which according to him was often taken without permission by his older children to play games. On January 5th, the police made a public appeal through television displaying a photo of Anna and requesting anyone with information about her whereabouts or fate to immediately contact law enforcement. Yet no witnesses came forward. The last time Anna was known to have made calls was to her mother and sister on December 31st, making her husband the last known person to have seen her. Surveillance camera footage from the neighborhood provided no leads. Anna was not captured on any cameras on the morning of January 1st, as if she had never left her home. On the contrary, her husband was recorded leaving and returning several times, but it was impossible to determine his destinations. Walsh's claim of a supermarket visit was debunked. His vehicle wasn't seen on any footage en route, nor was he spotted in the store. It wasn't until January 8th that Brian was arrested for providing false statements and taken in for questioning at the station while his home was finally searched. It was discovered that on January 1st, he had gone to a hardware store in a different area, not on the list of approved locations he could visit under house arrest conditions. There, he spent nearly $500 on a significant quantity of cleaning supplies, plastic sheeting, duct tape, a mop with a bucket, and utility rags. He paid in cash, presumably hoping his visit would go unnoticed. Horrifying discoveries in the family home. During the search, at first glance, nothing out of the ordinary or suspicious was found in the home. Everything was in its place with no signs of struggle or bloodstains detected. However, when law enforcement descended into the basement, there was no longer any doubt. This was the scene of a gruesome crime. There, smeared bloodstains were visible everywhere, and among the old clutter, a bloodied knife and saw wrapped in towels were hidden. Previously, Walsh had admitted that on January 3rd, he visited his mother's home located on the other side of town. He claimed he had violated his house arrest conditions because his mother needed help with household tasks due to her deteriorating health. But after the grim discoveries in the basement, police suspected that on his way, the man could have disposed of evidence or parts of his deceased wife's body. All the trash bins in the area where the spouses lived, as well as along the route to his mother's house, were inspected. These searches yielded results, and in one of them, a kitchen hatchet with traces of dried blood and several blood-stained towels, similar to those found in the Walsh's basement, were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that the blood in the basement on the towels, knife, hatchet, and saw belonged to the missing Anna, dispelling any remaining doubts about her demise. Search history reveals chilling intent. Police seized a laptop belonging to Mr. Walsh, as well as a tablet owned by the couple's eldest son from the Walsh residence. The search history on these devices left investigators in disbelief. Weeks before his wife's disappearance, Brian was actively searching online for information about the most favorable states for divorce in terms of property division. He also sought information on whether he could lay claim to the second home in Washington, D.C. owned by Emma and registered solely in her name, thereby uncovering a possible motive for the crime. Regarding the tablet, the first query made a round for in the morning on January 1st was, how long does it take for a body to start decomposing? This was followed by nearly 24 searches on how to dispose of a body, how to clean up blood traces, how to dismember a body, whether a body could be identified if the teeth were removed, how long DNA traces last, and whether a person could be charged with a crime if the body was never found. All this information was searched on his young child's tablet, the child of the woman he mercilessly dealt with. By January 3rd, Brian was already searching how and when can someone inherit the property of a person who has disappeared. Clearly, He was confident he would evade punishment and was preparing to claim the inheritance. Charges and trial. On January 18th, Brian was formally charged with the murder of his wife, despite the fact that her body or any remains had not been found. Prosecutors believe that on the night of January 1st, Brian intentionally or accidentally took his wife's life and then decided to dispose of her body by dismembering it in the basement of their home. He then packaged the body parts in plastic and over the following days, discarded them in trash bins across different parts of the city. The area around the Walsh residence, as well as within a couple of kilometers, was thoroughly examined for evidence. Nearby wastelands, wooded areas, and bodies of water were also searched, but these efforts yielded no results. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty and refused to disclose what he had done with the body. Additionally, it was revealed that Anna had been feeling unhappy lately and had even considered divorcing her husband. She mentioned this several times during phone conversations with her mother and sister. The day before she disappeared, she called her mother, asking her to fly from Serbia for a few days. However, her mother apparently did not take her daughter's words seriously and decided to postpone her visit. The trial of Brian Walsh is ongoing. The accused is currently being held at the Norfolk Correctional Facility awaiting his next court date. Anna's mother has been following the investigation from her home as she has not traveled to the United States. The Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has contacted the consulate in New York, which in turn has been in touch with the Norfolk District Attorney's Office to ensure that Anna's mother is timely informed about the investigation and hearings. As for the Walsh's 3 sons, they are now under state custody. None of Brian's family members wish to take care of them, citing Anna's mother's age and poor health, and her sister, who currently lives in Canada, also declined to take in her nephews. Only Anna's close friend, Pamela Barden, has expressed willingness to take the boys in, preferring that over them being separated and placed in different foster homes. Peter McCall, Monday, August 28, 1995, marked the day before the start of his junior year at Berkeley High School. The 16-year-old honors student and varsity crew team member had a passion for music and an insatiable curiosity, enjoying reading on topics ranging from astrophysics to poetry. That morning, Peter's mother, Susan, invited him to breakfast at Fat Apple's, a local Berkeley restaurant, but he declined. At around 9 a.m., he told his younger brother, Joseph, that he planned to take a bus to Cody's Books on Telegraph Avenue, then left the house. Peter never returned. When he hadn't come home by 11:30 p.m., his family reported him missing. Flyers with Peter's picture were quickly distributed across Berkeley, and his friends and family scoured the city in search of him. By the following Saturday, over 100 volunteers were combing through East Bay Hills parks in hopes of finding him. The most significant lead came from a bus driver who recalled seeing Peter board the number 43 bus on the morning he disappeared. He claimed that Peter asked him for directions to Montclair and for the time. The bus driver saw him speaking to a young woman with red-streaked hair. Peter got off the bus in downtown Berkeley to transfer to the number 51 bus to get to Montclair. The young woman stayed on the bus. Peter's family is unaware of any reason he may have had for wanting to go to Montclair. The bus driver also claimed that he'd seen Peter later that day in Montclair while he was on his lunch break. Peter was with a young man who was clean-cut and had an English accent. Peter approached the bus driver to ask for change. Peter's older sister, Rebecca, is slightly skeptical of this second sighting. Rebecca and her father were able to confirm at least one detail of the bus driver's account of his first interaction with Peter, the identity of the girl with the red-streaked hair. She turned out to be a teenager named Nicole, who coincidentally also went missing that day. However, she turned up after 3 days, having run off to Southern California with a boyfriend. Nicole and Peter both attended Berkeley High and had spoken briefly on the bus because they had recognized each other from school. They were acquaintances and not friends and only spoke briefly, so Nicole had no information on where Peter was going. A cab driver came forward, claiming to have driven Peter to the Oakland airport with a teenage girl. Peter's family extensively searched flight records to see if Peter had boarded a plane that day. They could not find any indication that he had, so this tip is generally considered to be a misidentification. 2 sightings of Peter place him still in Berkeley later that day. An employee at a Goodwill in downtown Berkeley believes Peter was in the store that day and purchased the shirt. The employee recognized Peter because he had shopped in the store before. 2 girls who went to school with Peter were sitting in a bus stop around 4 p.m. and believe they saw him sitting in the back of a passing number 43 bus. This would have been the line that Peter needed to take home, but he was past the stop he needed to get off at in order to get there. Several religious groups had been recruiting around the campus of the University of California, Berkeley, where Peter's father was a professor of environmental studies in 1995. According to Peter's family, he loved to read about and discuss topics such as philosophy and religion. He was known to stop and talk to and debate with people about their beliefs. Peter's family got in touch with several support groups for parents whose children had joined some of these groups. None of their research ever found any proof that Peter had left to join one of these communities. Peter did not seem prepared to leave for more than a few hours, as all he had with him were the clothes he was wearing. $100 in cash was found left behind in his desk. Peter had recently passed his driver's test, but his license had not come in the mail yet. It would not arrive at his house until a few weeks after his disappearance. If he had planned on running away, he may have needed cash and an ID to facilitate his travels. The McCall family no longer lives in Berkeley. Peter's brother lives in San Diego, and his sister and parents live in Washington State. The family still actively investigates Peter's case, checking online databases, keeping in contact with the police in Berkeley, traveling to different states, and meeting with members of various religious groups Peter may have joined. While they have so far been unable to find their son, Peter's parents have used their experience to try to help others. They run a 3-bed respite foster care facility out of their home in an effort to help troubled teenagers like the ones they encountered while searching for Peter. Janelle Bradford. Janelle Bradford was a 17-year-old honor student at Wilkinsburg High School in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She was quiet but funny and social but focused on her studies. She had a love for basketball and attended Bible study at a local church. Janelle's father had never been a part of her life, and she had lost her mother when she was just 5 years old. Her mother passed away from cardiac arrest following an asthma attack. Janelle was therefore raised by her maternal grandparents, with whom she was very close. On April 27, 1999, Janelle, who was just 2 weeks away from turning 18 and 2 months away from graduating high school, attended school as normal that day and then headed on to her after-school job at the Wilkinsburg YWCA on Ross Avenue. She was seen walking home after her shift, but she never arrived there. Janelle has been classified by police as an endangered runaway, although there is little evidence supporting this classification other than the fact that she was a teenager when she went missing. Janelle had no history of getting into trouble, and she had a good relationship with her grandparents. Her friends did not believe that she would have left willingly, especially considering how excited she was for her senior prom. That event was fast approaching, and Janelle had made extensive plans for it. Janelle's behavior did begin to change prior to her disappearance, according to her grandmother. After Janelle went on visits to 2 colleges she was interested in attending, she was not as concerned with high school as she once had been. She missed assignments and did not spend as much time studying. If Janelle met someone at one of these schools who introduced her to negative influences, this could support the theory that she ran away. However, it is also possible that, like many high school seniors, Janelle simply stopped putting effort into high school, knowing it was almost over. As it stands, we do not have any proof that Janelle ran away, and the possibility that something happened to her on her walk home that night in April of 1999 still exists. In 2016, an age-progressed image was released to show what she might look at age 35. Her case remains open. Clea Shundrol. 18-year-old high school senior, Clea Shundrol, who usually went by the nickname Clea, lived in Pine Bluff, Arkansas with her family in May of 1994. The honor student at Watson Chapel High School was having a busy but happy month. She had just gone to her senior prom and was weeks away from graduation. She had been asked to give a speech at the commencement ceremony. Clea dreamed of being a pediatrician and had been accepted in the pre-med program at State University in Nashville. Clea was also busy outside of her schooling. Clea had been awarded a summer internship at a pediatrician's office in Boston based on her academic achievements. To help cover the costs, she would incur traveling to Boston, and to help pay for her college classes in the fall, Clea had wanted to work part-time. A friend of hers had a job doing clerical work for a local nonprofit that supported local in-home daycares. When she needed to leave the position, she had told Clea about it. The friend's employer was a man named Dr. Larry Amos. He ran his nonprofit out of an office in his home, which was only a few blocks away from where the Hall family lived. When Clea told her parents about the position, they were open to her accepting it because it was in their neighborhood. They agreed to let Clea take the job as long as it did not interfere with her schoolwork or her obligations to their church. Since Clea did not have her own car, they also insisted that her mother drive her to and from work because they did not want her walking alone, especially when she was coming home in the evenings. On May 9th, as a senior, Clea was let out of school early. She had plans to go to work early since she had extra time and hoped to earn a little extra money beyond her normal paycheck. Clea's mother, Laurel, drove her over to the Amos house as planned, but no one was there. They came back home and Clea took a nap. Just before 5 p.m., Clea's employer's wife called her and told her that she was home, so Laurel drove Clea back over. Laurel watched Clea go before she drove home. It would be the last time she saw her daughter. Laurel spoke with Clea on the phone that night around 8 p.m., but she was not finished with work or ready to be picked up. Laurel remained at home waiting for a call from Leah asking for her ride home. Laurel fell asleep on the couch while waiting just before 10 p.m. Leah's father returned home from work at approximately 12:45 a.m. On May 10th, he saw his wife sleeping on the couch but did not wake her up until after he went into Clea's room and saw that she wasn't there. The Halls called Dr. Amos right away. Clea never worked past 10 p.m. and, according to Dr. Amos, she had signed out on her timesheet at 8:30. The Halls waited up all night for Clea, hoping that perhaps she had gone to a party in her first real move of serious teenage rebellion. When she was not home by morning, they called police. The police told the Halls that they would have to wait until Clea had been missing for 24 hours before they would take a missing persons report. Their report was finally taken at 5 p.m. on May 10th. According to Laurel Hall, the police in Pine Bluff were not quick to investigate the case, even after they finally took the report. For the first few days after Clea disappeared, they assumed she had run away. The Hall family, however, knew that Clea would not have done such a thing. The Hall family, therefore, launched their own efforts to find Clea. They, along with their church community, began their own searches of the area on May 10th, starting with a search of the wooded areas near the Amos home. The Hall family also covered their neighborhood in missing persons flyers with Clea's picture and bows made out of pink ribbon. However, many of them disappeared. At first, the family thought that the utility company may have removed them because they did not want the flyers on the utility poles. They later learned that they had been removed by local teenagers. The teenagers had taken down the missing persons flyers and bows Clea's family had put up around the neighborhood because they had been paid to do so by Dr. Larry Amos, Clea's employer. Dr. Amos is considered a person of interest in Clea's case due mainly to the fact that he was the last known person to see her. While Clea's mother, Laurel, has not accused him of being involved in Clea's disappearance, she believes Dr. Amos has not done enough to eliminate himself as a suspect. She is concerned by the fact that he will not take a polygraph, and his overall lack of cooperation in the investigation is alarming. He gave a brief statement after Clea went missing, but that has been the extent of his involvement in the search for Clea. He'd left for an out-of-state business trip on May 10th and therefore had not been available to give a statement to the police until the Saturday after Clea vanished. In addition to paying teenagers to remove flyers for Clea, Dr. Amos also removed some of these flyers himself. Clea's father, Willie, witnessed him doing so. Dr. Amos has given different accounts of the last time he saw Clea over the years. Her timesheet shows that she signed out of work at 8:30. In one statement, he says he did not see her leave but heard her go out the garage. In another statement, he says he saw her as she left the house with a can of peach pop in her hand. In both of these stories, Clea left without informing Dr. Amos that she had completed her work for the day, which was not her normal routine. Dr. Amos's wife, Patricia, would admit to police that this was odd. Dr. Amos originally agreed to allow police to search his home. However, he got into a disagreement with the detective when the police showed up to conduct the search and rescinded his consent. Since the police did not have enough evidence to get a search warrant, they ended up with nothing more than the cursory glance around part of the home that they got when they first arrived there. The Amos home would not be fully searched until 2012. In the home that gave off a terrible smell and had flies swarming around it. These statements were enough for a judge to grant a search warrant for Dr. Amos's home. On March 29, 2012, police spent approximately 6 hours searching the property. During the search, Dr. Amos told authorities that he had 8 sets of renovations performed on the home in the time since Clea went missing. Given the extensive amount of work that had been done on the home and the passage of 18 years, the odds of finding useful evidence were slim. However, the Pine Bluff Police Department did find some items that were potential pieces of evidence and would require forensic testing and remove them from the home. Those items were not submitted to the crime lab for 40 days after they were collected, however. After a month of not hearing anything about the evidence, Laurel Hall went to a city council meeting asking the council to put pressure on the police department to examine the evidence. She was assured by the police chief that the evidence was being checked on with the crime lab weekly. However, the same day after the council meeting, the Arkansas State Crime Lab released a statement saying they had never received evidence from the search. A Pine Bluff Police Department crime scene technician would later admit that she had forgotten to submit the evidence to the crime lab. She was suspended without pay as a result. When the evidence finally was tested, it did not reveal any signs of blood or anything else useful to the investigation. In the 25 years since Clea went missing, her family has remained active both in searching for her and in commemorating dates such as her birthday and the anniversary of her disappearance. Laurel Hall has given numerous media interviews over the years in hopes of reaching someone who may have information about the case. Clea is now an aunt and her 3 nieces all have a portion of her name in theirs. Her nieces and nephew all take part in the various events and remembrances the Halls still hold for Clea every year. Every May 9th, the family holds a balloon release. This event is not just an act of remembrance. However, it is also an attempt to spread information. A card with information about Clea and her case is attached to each balloon. My husband and I will not stop looking until we have taken our last breath, Laurel Hall promised in 2019. The case of Mohammed Shamji, a brilliant surgeon, father, and ruthless criminal, sheds light on the harrowing reality of domestic violence. Victims often endure abuse, humiliation, and physical harm, while tragically blaming themselves for their suffering. When such cases come to public attention, they provoke widespread condemnation, confusion, and questions. Why does the victim tolerate such treatment? Why don't they confide in others? Why don't they leave? Contrary to the stereotype that physical violence occurs only in dysfunctional families, statistics reveal that such abuse transcends social status, societal position, and professional achievements. Mohammed Shamji and Alana Shamji were esteemed doctors and scientific luminaries. Mohammed was a renowned neurosurgeon specializing in spinal injuries and diseases, while Alana was a distinguished family doctor with a PhD. Together, they dedicated their lives to saving others, yet few were aware of the turmoil behind closed doors. This shocking story captivated global attention when Mohammed Shamji admitted guilt, not to deny his actions but to shield his 12-year-old daughter, who had tragically witnessed her mother's death, from the trauma of testifying in court. Notably, shortly before the tragedy, Alana had posted a photo of her husband in a kimono on social media taken during one of his jiu-jitsu training sessions with a joking comment that this doctor could not only heal, but also break a neck. This post turned out to be prophetic. Alana Frick, life before meeting Mohammed. Alana Christina Frick was born in September 1977 in the Canadian city of Windsor, located in Ontario in the southern part of the country. She was the younger of 2 daughters in the family of George and Anna Frick, who emigrated from Croatia to North America in the early 1970s. Alana was raised alongside her older sister Caroline, with whom she was very close from an early age. The birth of Alana was seen as a miracle by her parents, as Anna had serious complications after her first pregnancy and doctors had said she would never conceive again. Alana's parents worked at a large car factory, striving to provide their daughters with everything they needed and to give them a good education. Both sisters were smart and did well in school, but Alana stood out for her determination and passion for learning. She spent nearly all her free time reading books, and she also managed to attend a dance studio, practice gymnastics, and compete in track and field. During middle school, Alana chose to work during summer breaks to help her family. She worked in cornfields and even then tried to manage her budget wisely. Alana excelled in math and other sciences, and by high school, she had decided to pursue a career in medicine and become a doctor. She graduated from high school as the top student and enrolled in a prestigious medical university without issue. Around this time, she also began a romantic relationship with a man named Matthew Ryan, whom she had known since high school and who was now studying in the same department. Their student romance lasted until graduation, but afterward, Frick decided to go to Ottawa and continue her studies in the capital's university residency program. Her boyfriend settled for a job at a local hospital and didn't consider furthering his studies. Alana's and Matthew's relationship continued long distance and lasted until nearly 2002. They even planned to marry, but eventually decided to remain friends. By then, Alana was interning at one of the country's top clinics and aimed to earn a doctorate while Matthew hadn't advanced in his career. Love at first sight. In February 2003, during a night shift at the hospital, Alana went to the staff room and saw a new colleague who immediately caught her attention. The young man, Alana Shamji, was just a year older than Alana and was doing his residency in the neurosurgery department. Mohammed came from a family of prominent doctors. He was born and raised in Ottawa in a family of the renowned surgeon Fard Shamji and his talented psychiatrist wife, Edith. Mohammed's older brother, Ali, was an experienced medical biophysicist. Both brothers graduated from Yale University, and Mohammed later returned to Canada to earn his doctorate from Western Ontario's Research University. Mohammed was also interested in the blonde, but initially, he made no effort to approach her. Alana, however, fell for this tall, dark-skinned man at first sight and tried to attract his attention. Soon, Mohammed asked his colleagues for her number and sent her a message, and their relationship began to blossom. Alana considered Mohammed a shy and modest man. He rarely took the initiative, felt uncomfortable on dates, jumped from topic to topic, or fell silent, appearing detached and introverted. Later, it turned out these oddities weren't due to shyness, but rather a lack of interest. Mohammed was already seeing another woman, but for some reason, he kept this from his infatuated colleague. When Frick discovered the existence of a rival, she resolved to win over Mohammed and become his one and only. Their relationship was rocky during the first year, with the couple breaking up 3 times before rekindling, mainly due to Alana's persistence. Her parents were aware of this and urged her to leave Mohammed, but she stood firm, believing she had found her one true love. Alana often pampered her lover with gifts, made surprises, and brought him home cooked meals. Mohammed seemed to just let himself be loved, readily accepting everything but reciprocating only occasionally. This one-sided game appeared to create an emotional dependence on Mohammed for Alana. Unplanned pregnancy, wedding, and the beginning of a nightmare. In the summer of 2004, Frick informed her partner that they were going to have a child. This news came as a surprise to both of them, causing more anxiety than joy. Nonetheless, Mohammed, raised in a strict conservative Muslim country, felt compelled to follow tradition and marry the mother of his child before its birth. In early September that year, the couple had a wedding with 2 ceremonies. The first adhered to all cultural customs respected by the groom's family, and the second took place among the couple's friends at one of the trendiest restaurant complexes. The newlyweds seemed happy and in love, but no one could have imagined that their marriage would be the start of a nightmare that would end in tragedy. The couple moved into a spacious house in one of Ottawa's prestigious neighborhoods. In January 2005, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Yasmina. Unfortunately, the birth of their daughter didn't strengthen their marriage. The young father was entirely focused on his career and planned to continue his education with his wife and newborn daughter taking a back seat. Moreover, Muhammad didn't hide his disappointment as he had hoped for a son. After the birth of her child, Moreover, Muhammad didn't hide his disappointment as he had hoped for a son. After the birth of her child, Alana went on maternity leave, focusing on household chores and caring for her daughter. This irritated her husband, who, after returning from work, would retreat to his home office, spending little time with his wife and child. Over time, he became increasingly nervous and irritable, criticizing his wife's appearance, refusing to eat what she cooked, and calling her stupid and useless. Alana tried not to complain about her family issues, not even to close friends or parents. However, one day while talking to her mother on the phone, Muhammad, returning home in a bad mood, began berating and insulting his wife, which her mother overheard. She tried to defend her daughter, but her son-in-law blamed Ileana for their crumbling marriage. Anna tried to convince her daughter to file for divorce and leave the man treating her this way, but Alana flatly refused, saying she loved her husband and would handle everything. She kept quiet about Muhammad's physical abuse simply because the verbal abuse no longer seemed enough for him. In the summer of 2005, the situation spiraled out of control when Muhammad, in a fit of rage, punched Alana in the face, breaking her nose. Alana, with her baby in hand, fled to friends and filed a police report for domestic violence. She also decided to get a divorce and leave the man she had married for good. Unexpectedly, Muhammad began begging his wife to return, promising never to hit her again or even raise his voice. He swore he would change, and that their family life would be everything Alana had ever dreamed of, and he would control his emotions. Shamji seemed sincerely remorseful, but this behavior was driven by certain circumstances. The young neurosurgeon was preparing to enroll at Duke University, aiming to earn his doctorate, and a criminal conviction could end his promising medical career. Muhammad cared only for himself and his future, but he succeeded in convincing Alana to drop the charges and not file for divorce. She even agreed to follow him to the United States, to North Carolina, where he was to continue his studies and earn a degree. A period of relative calm. Friends and family were baffled by why Alana didn't leave her tyrant husband and withdrew her police report. When she announced her intention to move to another country with Muhammad, they tried to dissuade her, but Alana stood firm. Freak was smart, educated, driven, and ambitious, financially independent, and capable of achieving any career goal. But her destructive relationship and emotional dependence on her husband were stronger. She was ready to abandon everything and sacrifice all for a marriage that didn't bring her happiness, only suffering. However, after moving to the United States, a period of relative calm came to their family. Muhammad was admitted to an elite biomedical engineering program, difficult to enter due to the intense competition. Meanwhile, Alana enrolled in a master's program at the School of Policy and Health at Duke University, receiving a scholarship covering her tuition. The couple seemed to reconnect, spending more time together. Their relationship became stable enough that they decided to have a second child. In August 2007, they welcomed their younger daughter, Faiza. However, Muhammad again couldn't hide his disappointment as he had hoped for a son. What does the happy family keep secret? In late summer 2009, the couple and their children returned to Canada, settling back into their home in Ottawa. This time, Alana decided not to stay on maternity leave for long, and she quickly secured a position at a prestigious hospital as a family doctor, earning a solid reputation. Meanwhile, her husband balanced work, studies, and teaching at a university. In the late 2000s, social media was gaining popularity worldwide, and the couple started a personal blog showcasing a seemingly ideal family in every sense. They posted photos of their travels, spoke about achievements in science, flaunted their luxurious lifestyle in a lavish home, attended prestigious conferences and trendy resorts, and spent time with friends at expensive restaurants. From the outside, they appeared to be a happy, successful, wealthy, and deeply in love couple with no problems, but their followers couldn't fathom what was hidden behind this facade. In reality, Muhammad again distanced himself from his wife, continuing to exert strict control over her. He carefully monitored who she interacted with, what she wore, and even checked her email and social media accounts. He openly criticized her appearance, style, and parenting methods, but Alana preferred to remain silent about it. The tension and aggression from Shamji grew, with him yelling at his wife and blaming her for all their arguments and discord. In 2011, the talented neurosurgeon was offered a fellowship in spinal surgery at one of the largest medical centers in Calgary. He accepted the offer, but this time, he went alone, leaving his family in Ottawa since Alana couldn't leave her job. For over a year, they maintained a long-distance relationship. But during one visit home, Mohammed left his laptop on, and Alana saw a message from a woman on his social media. The content suggested they were romantically involved. When Alana directly confronted Mohammed, he didn't deny it, admitting to having an affair. This was another painful blow for Frick, and she again considered divorcing her rude, unfaithful husband. Her family was sure she wouldn't forgive him this time. Surprisingly, Alana gave their family another last chance. Mohammed promised to end his affair and said they would start fresh in Toronto, where he had been offered a prestigious, well-paying job, domestic violence, and revenge affair. Shortly after moving, Mohammed expressed his continued desire for a son, suggesting they try again. Alana agreed, thinking that having a third child might help solidify their family. In October 2013, they welcomed a long-awaited boy named Marius. The father was happy, but his attitude toward his wife remained unchanged. Over the next few years, Shamji focused entirely on his medical career, becoming an accredited neurosurgeon with a reputation for handling the toughest and most hopeless cases that other doctors avoided. Frick also advanced, becoming a delegate for the Ontario Medical Association. However, tension between the couple began to rise again. Mohammed didn't stop at rudeness and insults, but resumed hitting the mother of his children. During a family ski vacation, Alana had a deep cut on her arm that required stitches, along with other injuries, but she claimed she hurt herself skiing. After returning home, Alana confided in her best friend that all the injuries were inflicted by her husband, following another argument over a newly discovered affair he had with a colleague. Alana had overheard part of a phone conversation between Mohammed and his mistress, and when she asked him about it, he beat her. Her friend again suggested she divorce him, and when Alana refused, joked that she should get a revenge affair. The women laughed, but the hurt wife might have thought it was a good way to get back at her cheating husband. The summer of 2016 was challenging. While the older kids were at camp and the youngest stayed with maternal grandparents, the couple's relationship completely fell apart. In early September, they celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary, sharing the news on social media. But a week later, they spoke of divorce. Mohammed refused, stating he was content, while a desperate Alana had an affair with a colleague who had shown interest in her. She immersed herself in this new relationship, basking in the care and attention of another man, enjoying the long-forgotten feeling of being loved and desired. Did she run away with her lover, leaving her kids behind? On November 25, 2016, a heated argument broke out in the family when Elena told her husband that divorce was inevitable. The next day, she met with a divorce lawyer and then left for a 3-day medical conference in another city. During this time, Mohammed sent her messages, pleading with her to reconsider and save the marriage, at least for the children. On November 30th, Alana returned home and made her final phone call to her parents. Her voice revealed some anxiety, but she assured them everything was fine. Later, it was discovered that she had tried calling the police that evening, but in her panic, misdialed one digit, leading to a tragic outcome. On December 1st, Anna couldn't reach her daughter, so she called her son-in-law to find out what had happened. Mohammed calmly told her that his wife had packed her bags in the middle of the night and fled to her lover, abandoning him and the children. Her parents didn't believe him, knowing their daughter would never leave her daughters and young son like that. They contacted a close friend of Alana's who lived nearby, asking her to discreetly watch the Shamji home while they took the first flight to Toronto and reported their daughter's disappearance to the police. Alana's friend reported that her car was still in the driveway, which only heightened the family's concern. Upon arriving at their daughter's house, they found nothing immediately suspicious. But Mohammed was agitated, saying they had called the police unnecessarily and insisting that Alana was with her lover. He had already told the police this version when they visited earlier following the report of Mrs. Shamji's disappearance. Body in a suitcase. In the early morning hours of December 2nd, a man walking his dog along the river, about 24 miles from Shamji's home, saw a large suitcase at the base of the bridge. He was initially going to pass it by, but curiosity got the better of him, especially since the suitcase looked almost new. When he opened it, he was horrified to find the lifeless body of a blonde woman inside. He immediately notified the police, and the suitcase and body were sent to the medical examiner's office for identification and to determine the cause and circumstances of death. There were no issues with identification as the criminal hadn't even bothered to remove the luggage tag from the suitcase from Alana's recent trip to a conference. Her parents confirmed her identity. The body had multiple abrasions and bruises, but the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation and a broken neck. The woman was dressed in pajamas and had no shoes, and based on the position of her body, she had been placed in the suitcase immediately after her death. The young witness, Muhammad, was arrested that evening at a coffee shop where he was meeting with a lawyer. It was evident he was planning to leave the country, but he didn't have the chance. He was charged with first-degree murder, but the neurosurgeon denied any involvement. However, a horrific detail of the incident emerged. It turned out that the couple's eldest daughter, 12-year-old Yasmina, had accidentally witnessed her mother's assassination. According to the girl, she heard screams and noise coming from her parents' room and ran there. She cracked open the door and saw her father kneeling behind the bed. Her mother was likely lying on the floor, but Yasmina couldn't see her from the doorway. Muhammad yelled at his daughter, ordering her to leave immediately, shut the door behind her, and go to bed. In the morning, he told the girls that their mother had left. Yasmina, despite her age, understood something terrible had happened, but couldn't imagine that her father had taken their mother's life. A confession, trial, and sentence. To spare his daughter from having to testify in court, the accused confessed and recounted what happened that dreadful evening. According to him, he and his wife argued about her infidelity and desire for a divorce. Muhammad claimed he didn't mean to harm Alana, but things escalated spontaneously. The argument turned physical and she tried to call the police, but he knocked the phone from her hand. She began screaming, and Muhammad struck her multiple times in the face, then pinned her to the floor and strangled her with his hands. At this moment, their daughter walked in, but couldn't see what was happening due to the bed. When Muhammad realized his wife wasn't breathing, he attempted to resuscitate her, but it was in vain, as in his rage he had broken her neck. He then put her body in a large suitcase, loaded it into the trunk of his car, and drove around aimlessly for hours, unsure of what to do next. Upon reaching a small bridge over a river, he decided to throw the suitcase down, hoping the current would carry it away, making it impossible to find. However, in the darkness, he didn't see that the suitcase got stuck against the bridge's foundation. In fall 2017, while the trial of the criminal surgeon was underway, a new scandal erupted involving his father, Farid Shamji, who made disparaging remarks about his deceased daughter-in-law. He attempted to justify his son's actions, saying his wife had been unfaithful and provoked him. These comments led to an investigation into the elderly man, and his medical license was revoked. In April 2019, Muhammad was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, though with the possibility of parole in 14 years. Given the time served during the trial, he may be released as early as 2030. Moreover, Muhammad was forbidden from contacting his children or Alama's parents and ordered to pay them a large sum as compensation. He was also permanently stripped of his medical license. Janet Ferris, a 69-year-old mother of 2 and grandmother of 5, disappeared under mysterious circumstances in October 1992. On October 1st, she left her home in Mill Bay on Vancouver Island to drive to Innisfail, Alberta, for her niece's wedding. She spent her first night at her sister's home in White Rock, British Columbia, before continuing her journey. However, 2 weeks later, her family received a call from relatives in Alberta, asking why Janet had not arrived at the wedding. By then, the investigation into her disappearance was already 2 weeks behind. The last transaction on Janet's credit card was at the Tappan Esso Serve and Grocery, west of Salmon Arm, British Columbia, where she had purchased gas. Janet's family, along with volunteers, scoured highways in the region, searching ditches and surrounding areas. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police conducted an aerial search using helicopters but found no trace of Janet or her vehicle. Griffin Lake, located just off the Trans-Canada Highway and approximately 18 miles west of Revelstoke, became a key point of interest in the investigation. The Moienko family operates Griffin Lake Cabins and Resort on the northwest end of the lake. On August 20th, 2019, some of their guests asked them about an incident they had recently heard about that had occurred 10 years earlier. They had read an article online about 2 teenagers who had been awarded the Governor General's Award for Bravery after rescuing a family whose van had gone into Griffin Lake in June of 2009. The guests asked the Moienkos if their van was still in the lake. The Moienkos did not know because they had not owned the cabins at that time. They sent their 13-year-old son, Max, out on the lake with the guests when they took their boat out to investigate. Approximately 10 feet offshore, the group did see what appeared to be a vehicle roughly 15 feet below the surface of the water. They assumed that it was the van from the 2009 accident, and their curiosity was satisfied. The guests left later that day. The following day, August 21st, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer came out to the cabins to have a picnic with relatives of his who were staying there. The topic of the search for the van in the lake came up, and Nancy Moienko, Max's mother, asked the RCMP officer why the vehicle had never been removed from the lake. He told her that it had been. He then told Nancy to make a report about the vehicle in the water. 2 RCMP officers came out to the lake to investigate. Since Max had seen the vehicle, they took him with them when they went out on a boat to see it for themselves so that he could show them where it was. The vehicle was not visible from the boat that day, however. Max, therefore, jumped into the water and swam down far enough to take a video of the vehicle with his GoPro to show the RCMP officers. 3 days later, the vehicle, a 1986 Honda Accord, was pulled from the lake. Inside the car were the remains of Janet Ferris. To help deal with their grief and the uncertainty they felt as a result of Janet's disappearance, her family had spent the previous almost 27 years believing that she must have run off the road trying to avoid hitting an animal or after falling asleep at the wheel. Where Janet's car was found obviously supports this theory, but further physical examination of the car and the lack of damage indicative of the car having been hit by another vehicle before going into the water also led the RCMP to announce that they did not believe that any criminal actions were involved in the accident. The Trans-Canada Highway runs right alongside the lake in the area where the car was found. Today, there are concrete barriers to help prevent cars from going into the lake, but they were not there in 1992. The road was also much more narrow than it is today, so Janet's car could have rolled down the hill into the lake even if it had gone off the road even slightly. The Ferris family and the RCMP have both expressed respect and gratitude for Max and the role he played in finally solving the mystery of what happened to Janet. "My dad and my uncle and our whole family are so thankful to him," said Erin Ferris Hartley, Janet's granddaughter. The family is considering visiting Griffin Lake and meeting the Moienkos in the spring or summer of 2020. RCMP Corporal Thomas Blankney hopes that the solving of Janet's disappearance will empower others in the community. "That's what we say to the public," he told the Times columnist. "They are our eyes and ears out there. You never know when you make that phone call what it can lead to, and it certainly paid off in this case." In October 1999, Viktor Moisenko took his 4-year-old daughter Julia with him on a train ride between Minsk and Essepovichi in Belarus. Viktor had a drink and then fell asleep partway through the journey. When he woke up, his clothes were stained with blood, and Julia was gone. DNA tests would later show that the blood on Viktor's clothes did not belong to Julia. Viktor did not know how the blood came to be on his clothes, but it may have come from some sort of altercation that he did not remember. He could not remember very many details from the train ride at all. The circumstances surrounding Viktor losing Julia would place a subsequent search for her. A nationwide search was launched for Julia, and her devastated mother, Ludmila, passed out flyers and train stations all throughout Belarus. Ludmila and Victor spent Vasipavasai, asking passengers if they had seen Julia. They also checked in shops, wells, and deserted buildings all along the route between the two cities. After 2 years with no sign of Julia, the family moved. The house they had shared with their youngest daughter was close to a train station, and the passing trains were too painful of a reminder of their missing daughter for Ludmila and Victor to bear. Julia's case was reopened in 2017, with the police still suspicious of her parents. Both Ludmila and Victor took and passed polygraph tests. The renewed effort still did not provide the Moienko family with any answers, although they remained hopeful that they would one day find Julia. Then in 2019, Victor and Ludmila received word from the police that there was a woman living in Russia who may have been their daughter. The woman traveled to Belarus, and DNA tests proved that 24-year-old Yulia Garina was in fact Julia Moienko. Julia had somehow ended up in Russia, in the city of Ryazan, some 500 miles away from where she had last been seen. 2 police officers found her alone in a train station there sometime after she had gone missing. The 4-year-old was able to tell the police her first name and the first names of her parents, but not their last name. Because she had a book from a library in a nearby town with her when she was found, authorities assumed that she was from the area, and she was never connected to the missing persons case in Belarus. While Julia has no strong memory of her disappearance as an adult, when she was found, she had memories of being on a train with a man and a woman. After they got off the train, the 3 of them slept in abandoned buildings, begged for money, and tried to avoid the police. The man and the woman have never been identified. With no one claiming Julia, authorities sent her to a foster home that cared for children while they waited for a placement in an orphanage. Julia was fortunate enough to never make it to an orphanage. Irina Alpatova was a pharmacist who lived in Ryazan. One of her sons was born with serious medical problems, and Irina made a promise that she would take in an orphan if he were to live. Her son survived, and she went to the facility where Julia was being held and told them that she would raise any one of the children that lived there. She was given Julia. Julia took her adoptive name of Garina and grew up in Ryazan. When she grew up, she went to school to be a pharmacist like Garina and had a daughter of her own. Her family was always honest with her about how she came to be with them. Over the years, based on the fact that as a child, she described being with a man and a woman, Julia began to believe that they had been her parents and that they had abandoned her. Hoping that her birth family had lost her instead, she researched missing persons cases online, hoping that she would be the subject of one. However, like the police had when she was a child, she worked under the assumption that she was from Russia and never came across her case in Belarus, which reinforced her fears that she had been abandoned. Yulia's boyfriend, Ilya, however, had more luck in his own research and eventually stumbled upon Julia Moienko's case. He and Julia reached out to the local police in Belarus and received the Moienko's phone number and some pictures of them. Looking at the pictures, she was sure that these were her biological parents because of the physical resemblances she shared with each of them. Shortly thereafter, she received a phone call from her biological sister, who had gotten her phone number from the police. She was also able to speak to her biological parents for the first time in 20 years during that phone call. She learned that she had not been abandoned as she had feared, but had instead been frantically searched for by loving parents who had her taken from them. Julia was reunited with Victor and Ludmila at a police station in Belarus, where DNA samples that would ultimately prove that she was their daughter were also taken. The reunion was full of tears from the parents and their daughter. Victor begged Julia for forgiveness for losing her, which she gave him. The family stayed together and talked until 3 in the morning when Julia and her boyfriend had to travel back to Russia to be with Julia's daughter. Julia does not have plans to move back to Belarus because of the ties she has in her adopted hometown of Ryazan. She does now, however, receive a good morning text message from her parents in Belarus every single morning. "40-year-old William Molt was a quiet man who was not much for socializing or drinking. On the night of November 7, 1997, however, he went out to a nightclub where he had a few drinks. He called his girlfriend around 9:30 p.m. to tell her that he planned to leave to come back to their home in Lantana, Florida shortly. Around 11 p.m., he left the club in his white 1994 Saturn. According to witnesses, he did not appear to be intoxicated when he left. William never arrived home, and it will be almost 22 years before his disappearance was finally solved. On August 28, 2019, Barry Fay was driving from Fort Lauderdale to his home in Wellington, Florida, when he received a series of screenshots from one of his neighbors. The screenshots were from Google Earth and showed the pond behind Barry's house. Barry's neighbor had been sent the screenshots by her ex-husband, who had been looking at his former neighborhood on Google Earth. Barry's neighbor asked him if he thought a white shape in the pond visible in the screenshots could be a car. He did. Barry could not see anything from the shore of the pond when he got home. He had never seen anything unusual in the pond. In the 14 months he had lived in his home in the Grand Isles neighborhood. Even though he spent a lot of time in his backyard working on his landscaping, and the water level in the pond had gotten very low during his time living in the home. Barry then asked another one of his neighbors to fly his drone over the pond. The drone's camera seemed to confirm that there was a white car submerged in the pond. Barry then called the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. The sheriff's office arrived at the pond at 6:40 p.m. and had to work until midnight to pull the vehicle out of the water. It was a white 1994 Saturn. Inside were the remains of William Molt. The teardrop-shaped pond where the car was found currently has houses on two sides of it and a road on the other with a guardrail preventing cars from driving off the road and into the pond. None of these things were there in 1997, however, when the Grand Isle subdivision was under construction. None of the homes in the subdivision were constructed until 1998. When William Molt went missing, the community only consisted of roads and ponds, and the guardrail had not yet been put in place. While the car was quickly tied to William, it would take an additional 2 weeks for the medical examiner to confirm that the bones found inside the vehicle were his and finally solve the 2 decades-old disappearance. On December 20th, 2017, Mark Perez, special agent in charge of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, held a press conference to announce a significant breakthrough in the case of Mike Williams. Mike, a Tallahassee real estate appraiser, was believed to have drowned while duck hunting on Lake Seminole on December 16, 2000, and was presumed to have been eaten by alligators. "Being here now, I can tell you what happened to Mike Williams," Perez stated. Mike Williams did not drown in the lake. He wasn't eaten by alligators. He didn't leave town and abandon his wife and 18-month-old daughter. He was murdered. While details were withheld due to the ongoing investigation, Perez revealed that investigators had notified the Williams family of new discoveries. This case, he said, was about love, betrayal, infidelity, and greed, but also about a mother's unwavering determination. For 17 years and 4 days, Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, refused to believe her son had drowned. She relentlessly urged law enforcement to investigate, convinced that justice would prevail. "I had 2 choices. He was alive or dead. I chose to believe he was alive, and I really think that's what helped me," Cheryl said during the press conference. "A lot of people called me crazy, but if I had given up, we never would have found him." Her persistence paid off when Brian Winchester, Mike's close friend and later husband of Mike's wife, Denise, was sentenced to 20 years in prison the day before the press conference. Cheryl's belief was vindicated. The truth emerged, ironically, because of those responsible. In 2000, Brian and Denise's affair, which began in 1997, culminated in Mike's murder. Over time, their relationship deteriorated, turning from love to mistrust. Fearing Denise would reveal the truth after their divorce, Brian attacked her, setting off a chain of events that brought long-awaited justice to Mike and his family. Denise, on the other hand, went to great lengths to get him a life sentence. She was very persuasive in asking the jury for the maximum sentence, and it was these efforts that led to Brian having nothing to lose, and he made a deal with the prosecutor. Brian was sentenced to 20 years in 2017 for the kidnapping of Denise Williams, but he avoided a life sentence. Denise was celebrating the victory and was unaware that the conviction was part of a deal in which Brian Winchester, 49, admitted to planning the murder and a 17-year cover-up of the murder, and received immunity from any prosecution for his role in the case. In exchange, he led investigators to Mike's body and gave a full and truthful confession. It would only be a few months later, and on May 8, 2018, Denise Williams would be arrested. At first glance, things are a little confusing, aren't they? Let's break down this case in detail. Jerry Michael Williams was born on October 16, 1969 in Bradfordville, north of Tallahassee. The son of a bus driver and a kindergarten teacher. Family and friends called him Mike. Even though the family didn't have much money, and the boy, along with his older brother, grew up living in a trailer, those were happy times. The parents cared about their son's future, and instead of building a house, they set aside money for the education of both boys, who themselves worked part-time at night in supermarkets. The sons enrolled in North Florida Christian High School. There, Mike excelled. He became student council president, played soccer, and was active in the Key Club. At the age of 15, Mike started duck hunting as a hobby and met Denise Merrill. The young lad was a soccer player and student council president. Denise was a cheerleader and council secretary, and they began dating. Friends thought they were a great couple. While still in high school, Mike became best friends with Brian Winchester, whom Denise introduced him to. Brian later had a friend, Katie Thomas, and the two couples remained friends for the rest of Mike's life. After high school, Mike attended Florida State University, where he majored in political science and urban planning. The lovers graduated together. Denise became a public accountant. Mike became a real estate appraiser. Mike proved to be a valuable worker. He often worked 15 hours a day, and, of course, his career took off. In 1994, the young, successful man married Denise. It was around this time that Brian married Kathy as well. All four of them continued to stay in close contact. Mike loved his wife dearly, strived to provide for their family as best he could, and had incredible energy. At the age of 31, Mike Williams achieved considerable success. As a real estate appraiser, he was earning nearly $200,000 a year. The couple was able to afford a home in a small upscale neighborhood on the east side of town, and in 1999 became happy parents. They had a daughter whom the couple named Ansley. Mike's friends told me that he was always prudent. Since the young man was engaged in quite risky activities, he wanted to be sure that, in case of disaster, his family would definitely be taken care of. Not surprisingly, Mike turned to his best friend, who was working as an insurance agent at the time. Ryan sold him 2 insurance policies for $250,000 and later for $500,000. In 2000, Mike's father passed away. Williams was so stunned by this suddenness that, wanting to financially secure his own family, he again turned to a friend. Brian helped Mike to insure his life for $1 million. Thus, about 6 months before his disappearance, the life of the loving father of the family was insured for almost $2 million. According to Denise, on the morning of December 16, 2000, her husband woke up early to go duck hunting on Lake Seminole, a large reservoir connected to the Apalachicola River. It was the day of their 6th wedding anniversary, and the couple planned to celebrate the date at night in Apalachicola, a small town on the bayou. The wife and daughter waited for Mike at home at noon, but he never returned. Naturally, Denise became concerned and called her father, who in turn called Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester. Together with his father, Brian drove to Lake Seminole. There, they found Mike's Ford Bronco car near the boat dock, but Mike himself was nowhere to be found. The men went around to all the places Mike liked to hunt, but couldn't even find the boat, so they decided to call the police. After investigators from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency were called, the search for Mike began. A few hours later, a helicopter pilot found the boat drifting about 225 feet from the boat ramp. A search of the boat turned up Mike's shotgun, still in its case. Apparently, he never got to use it. The search became a rescue operation. Locals believe that before the 3 rivers were dammed to form the lake, the reservoir was the site of an orchard. Thus, the lake got its name Stumpfield due to the many remaining stumps that protruded above and below the water level, requiring careful handling of any motorized boat in the area. Because of this, searchers speculated that Williams hit a stump on his boat, fell out, and submerged himself in the water. His wading boots filled with water, and he probably drowned when he couldn't get out. Several other agencies were called in to help, including a dive team from Montgomery, Alabama, and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. But the extensive and methodical search yielded nothing. Mike was never located. A week passed and the rescue operation turned into a body search operation. Teams were given probe poles to probe the bottom of the lake, and dogs were brought to the site. 10 days into the search, volunteers found a camouflage patterned hunting hat that could not be linked to Williams. Officials with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency speculated that Mike had been eaten by alligators, which is why the body could not be found. There were actually quite a few alligators living in the lake. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement found no signs indicating a violent death and agreed with that theory. After 5 weeks, the search was called off. The day after the search was called off, Denise held a memorial service for Mike less than 2 months after the alleged accident. It seemed to everyone that Denise had come to terms with the loss of her husband, but Mike's mother had not. 6 months later, in June 2001, an angler discovered wading boots floating in the lake. Divers searched the lake area and retrieved a lightweight hunting jacket and flashlight from the bottom. In one of the jacket's pockets was a hunting license with Williams's name and signature. The find raised many questions. Neither the hunting jacket nor the boots had visible teeth marks indicative of an alligator attack. None of the items found showed signs of having been in the water for 6 months. The boots were not slimy and the flashlight still worked. However, a week later, Denise's attorney asked the court to declare Mike Williams dead. Based on the items found, he suggested that alligators and other aquatic life had swallowed the body whole. The motion was granted. The death certificate said Mike died on December 16, 2000. Cause of death: accidental drowning while duck hunting on Lake Seminole. The body has yet to be recovered. This is how Mike Williams' story might have ended if not for Cheryl Williams, who refused to give up and continued to search for her son. "All I know is that I can't stop looking for him until I find him," she said. Cheryl's efforts seriously strained her relationship with her former sister-in-law. Denise demanded she stop searching and accept reality. She said, "I'm tired of seeing articles about Mike and his disappearance. I just want to move on with my life. If you keep pushing this investigation, you will never see your granddaughter again." Cheryl couldn't give up on her son, and Denise carried out her threat. If not for the mother's persistence, her son's story might have remained submerged at the bottom of a dark, algae-covered lake. It took Cheryl Williams 3 years to convince law enforcement officials to open an investigation into her young son's disappearance. "I made phone calls, put up signs about my missing son, wrote to the governor of Florida every day, compiled my notes into an evidence book, asked people to post on social media, and contacted reporters." Cheryl will tell you years later. The persistent mother contacted Matthew Oresco, an alligator expert. In his response, he explained that alligators do not feed during the cold winter months. Cold weather causes water temperatures to drop, so alligators don't feed in the winter. All they do is maintain their body temperature. 14 degrees is too cold for an alligator to be interested in food at all. Moreover, Oresco wrote that after an alligator kill, there is always forensic evidence left behind. Eventually, after 3 years, Cheryl Williams convinced law enforcement to drop the ridiculous alligator theory and launch an official investigation into her son's disappearance. The case was reopened because of little-known facts regarding alligators' eating habits. Evidence gathered from interviews and a little official data convinced investigators that Williams' death was no accident. "My gut feeling is that Mike did not die in Lake Seminole, and that's the general consensus of all the law enforcement agencies working on this case," said Rami Austin, a former investigator with the 2nd District State's Attorney's Office who prosecuted Mike's case. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Agency initially took over the case because Williams was considered a missing hunter. Officers spent 735 hours searching a 10-acre section of the lake for the body, but didn't spend a minute looking for signs of wrongdoing. Jackson County Sheriff's deputies brought in to help with the search also did not consider other possibilities. Investigators interviewed everyone involved in the search, and police officer David Arnett, who was present at the scene that day, years later said, "Some things immediately look strange. Williams didn't usually hunt alone. His truck was found in an undeveloped area from which he would have had to drag the boat over mud, not on the nearby concrete boat launch he usually used. A terrible storm that night should have pushed the boat to the east shore, but it was found on the west shore. The boat's motor wasn't running, but it was full of gasoline. If Mike had been driving the boat and fell out of it, it would have continued to float in circles until it ran out of gas." Unfortunately, law enforcement began to doubt too late that they were dealing with a simple drowning. The crime scene had already been trampled by numerous volunteers and searchers. A car that could have served as a clue was taken by the family without any verification. Potential witnesses were missed. Denise Williams and Brian Winchester became suspicious to investigators because they learned that Winchester had divorced his wife, Kathy, and married Denise. They also learned of Denise's unexpected financial gain of nearly $2 million from her late husband's life insurance policy. Detectives determined that it was Winchester who sold the policy to Mike. They also found it strange that Denise, as Mike's wife, did not want to have anything to do with the investigation and tried to prevent Cheryl's activity, even forbidding the grandmother to communicate with her granddaughter. In 2005, the newly married couple were called in for questioning, which gave nothing new to the investigation. Brian provided an alibi for the morning of the disappearance of Mike Williams. He said he was 60 miles from the lake, at home, in bed, as his ex-wife Kathy could attest. He said he had intended to go hunting with his father-in-law in the morning, but overslept. Denise's interrogation also yielded no new leads. In 2008, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement announced that Mike's disappearance was not an accident, and they believe he was the victim of a crime. However, without sufficient evidence, they, alas, cannot prosecute. "We have suspicions, but we need proof." Another investigation failed to find out her son's fate, but Cheryl Williams did not give up again. Her efforts led to the Discovery Cable Channel doing a story on Mike's disappearance and subsequent investigations in late 2011. By then, Cheryl had become disillusioned with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, believing it was either incompetent or uninterested in solving the case. Beginning in 2012, Mike's mother wrote about one letter a day to the governor, Rick Scott, asking him to either assign the investigation to another agency or appoint a special prosecutor to do so. Cheryl sent 2,600 letters to the governor over 9 years. In 2012, Denise caught Brian cheating, and they broke up. The following year, Denise filed for divorce. After a few more years, an appraisal of the former family home was to take place, after which even property issues would no longer bind them. This event was a turning point in Mike's case. Brian didn't want a divorce. Denise didn't want to continue their relationship. They were constantly fighting, and the Williams investigation was poking fun at them. Brian would call Denise, and she stopped returning his calls. He couldn't handle the stress level. On August 5, 2016, the day a real estate appraisal was due as part of a court order, Denise left her home to drive to work at Florida State University. While talking to her sister on the phone, she saw someone climb over the back seat of her car. Turned out to be Winchester. Brian pressed a loaded gun against Denise's ribs and told her to drive straight ahead. He said he had to do that because she wasn't answering his calls. Denise tried to calm Brian down, agreed with everything he said, and promised to give him a chance to save their marriage. Brian believed it. Denise assured him that she wouldn't go to the police and report what he had just done, and Brian got out of the car. As he got out, he took the brown sheet, plastic sheeting, bleach sprayer, and tools with him. It became clear that Denise had miraculously escaped death. Denise called emergency services. Brian was quickly arrested and charged with kidnapping, which is a first-degree felony in Florida and carries a life sentence as the maximum penalty. He was also charged with domestic violence and armed burglary. The court decided to keep Brian in custody without bail. Cheryl Williams expressed hope that this development will lead to the solving of her son's disappearance case. Brian is not going to let Denise run around alone with all that money, she told the New York Daily News. "I pray that he will tell us what really happened." And Brian did tell, bargaining himself an extremely favorable deal with the prosecutor and avoiding a life sentence. At first, I think we were all doing really well, but I wasn't a good husband. Brian began his story. One day, I found a note in my first wife Kathy's purse and realized she was cheating on me. I wanted revenge. We often went to bars and concerts with Denise and Mike. I had been friends with Denise since high school. I was never really attracted to her. But after Kathy cheated on me, I started looking at other women differently. The affair between Brian and Denise began in October 1997. One time, drunken sex at a rock concert quickly escalated to frequent secret meetings. We started meeting at hotels during the workday. We met whenever we have the opportunity. Brian recounted. He did not want a divorce. Denise made it clear that she would never divorce her husband. Public opinion was important to her, and she did not want to share custody of her daughter. Over time, the affair became more than just meeting for casual sex. Denise and Brian thought of themselves as a couple, exchanging gifts and love letters. It became clear that they couldn't go on like this. They could not be without each other, and divorce was unacceptable to Denise. Her pious image was not to be harmed. Around this time, Mike almost died in a hunting accident. Brian saved him, and Denise suddenly saw a way out of the situation. After the deal with the prosecutor, Brian will reveal. The year 2000 prompted us to start talking about Mike and Kathy's death. Denise wanted it all on me, not her, and she wanted a scenario where it wasn't a murder, but an accident. She wanted death to be left up to God. That way she could live with it. After considering various options, Brian and Denise settled on a boating accident. In doing so, they timed the murder so that they could get the maximum possible payout on Mike's life insurance policy. They both realized that Mike had to be killed before one of the 3 policies expired at the end of December 2000. The plan was in place. Brian called his friend to go hunting. He said he'd found a great spot on the shores of Lake Seminole. Mike expected to go there with Brian and return home by noon to celebrate his anniversary with his wife. I told him that we were going to go to a special place and that he absolutely had to bring his wading boots with him. I had to make sure he took them with him because it was believed that if you fell overboard in wading boots, you would drown very quickly. The plan was to make death look like an accidental drowning. Once Brian and Mike were in the water, Brian pushed Mike out of the boat. But instead of sinking, he grabbed onto the stumps and began to wade through them to the shore. Brian panicked. I didn't know what to do. Mike started calling loudly for help. I didn't know how to get out of this situation. I had a shotgun. I was panicking, and I shot him in the head. I didn't think about what I was doing. Things didn't go according to plan, and I needed to cover up what happened. There was hardly any time left. I should have been back home by now and getting ready to go hunting with my father-in-law. No one knew I was at the lake with Mike, so I decided it would be best for me to drive home and pretend like I had overslept. I drove home and hoped that Kathy was still asleep. I entered the house as quietly as I could. Katie was asleep. My phone was on the floor. As I could. Katie was asleep. My phone was on the floor. I went to bed, called my father-in-law, and apologized. Brian did everything he could to create an alibi for himself. Then he hid the body. Denise didn't know that Brian had shot Mike in the head and buried him. Brian tried to tell her, but she didn't want to listen. It was enough for her that her husband was gone. Denise wanted to go on living with the idea that it was God who kept him from swimming out and let him drown. According to Brian, they promised each other that neither of them would ever say anything. Denise and Brian justified what happened by saying that the main reason Mike was killed was because it was impossible for them to live together. We said the money was just the cherry on the cake. Brian would pronounce in court. Investigators learned that it was Brian who planted a hat, boots, flashlight, and license. First, he needed to keep searchers from leaving a lake, and afterwards, he needed grounds to pronounce Mike dead so Denise could get insurance since a recognition process usually takes about 5 years. The lovers managed it in just 7 months. Including Social Security and other benefits, Denise received about $2 million on May 8, 2018. Denise Williams was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to a felony, which carried a life sentence. Denise pleaded not guilty to all 3 charges. In February 2019, she was sentenced to life in prison. 5 months later, Mike and Denise's daughter, Ansley, received all of her late father's assets and insurance money owed to Denise. In January 2020, Denise Williams appealed the conviction and life sentence. Her attorney argued before Florida's First District Court of Appeal that there was no evidence that she was involved in committing the murder. In November 2020, the murder conviction was overturned, but the 30-year sentence for conspiracy to commit murder was upheld. Denise is now in custody at the Florida Women's Reception Center. She will be 78 years old when she is released. Brian Winchester was transferred to Madison Correctional Institute in Florida to serve the remainder of his sentence. His current release date is set for July 30th, 2036. He will be 67 years old. Ansley, daughter of Mike and Denise, insists her mother is innocent and places the blame on Brian Winchester. She refused to speak to any media regarding the outcome of the case and her personal life. According to Cheryl and Nick, Ansley's uncle, they have not been able to connect with Ansley. Cheryl is very sorry that she has lost not only her son, but also her granddaughter. Ruth Bombgartner, a 22-year-old senior at Ohio Wesleyan University in Delaware, Ohio, was majoring in art and a member of the Delta 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 Tri-Delt sorority. On the night of May 4th, 1937, Ruth attended a singing practice for an inter-sorority competition at the Tri-Delt house. Afterward, she returned to her dorm to study for an exam scheduled for the next day. In letters to her parents, Ruth had mentioned feeling tired and overwhelmed, though her sorority sisters noted she appeared to be in good spirits during the practice. Around 11 p.m., Ruth stopped by the dorm's smoking lounge to chat with her sorority sisters, still cheerful. She said goodnight shortly before midnight, her hair in curlers and dressed in pajamas and a bathrobe, indicating she was headed to bed. The next day, Ruth's absence became alarming when she failed to show up for dinner, something her friends knew to be unusual. Further inquiries revealed that Ruth had not attended any of her classes or taken the exam she had prepared for the night before. By 10:30 p.m., her sorority sisters reported her missing to university officials. Initially, the university contacted Ruth's parents in Lakewood, Ohio, to confirm whether she had returned home, but they discovered she had not. Ruth's mysterious disappearance became a case that baffled her family, friends, and the university community. Her parents were alarmed and traveled to the campus to help look for their daughter. Mrs. Baumgartner went through her daughter's dorm room and determined that the only missing clothing items were a brown suit, hat, and shoes. A recently purchased overnight bag was missing as well. The pajamas and robe Ruth had last been seen wearing were hung up in the room, and her hairpins and curlers had been put away. Ruth's dorm room was room 319, one of the few single rooms in hall. The room was left perfectly clean and organized, which was apparently not how Ruth usually kept it. Ruth's watch, change purse, and sorority pin had all been left behind. Ruth's key to the room, as well as her, was found placed on the back corner of a staircase in Austin Hall, between the second and third floors. Ruth's bright red Dodge convertible, which had been an early graduation gift from her father, was found at the garage where she kept it with the keys left in the ignition. Ruth's sorority sisters essentially formed their own detective agency, canvassing campus hangouts and questioning taxi drivers and train conductors in the area. Police searched a nearby quarry where Ruth liked to go to study, and a massive ground search covered the campus and the surrounding areas. No further clues were found. Ruth's parents originally feared that she was suffering from amnesia brought on from all the stress she was under. She had told them that she didn't have enough time to do everything she needed to do and fulfill all of her obligations. Ruth was also concerned that she wouldn't have enough credit hours to graduate on time. She was scheduled to graduate just a few weeks after her disappearance. The possibility that Ruth had been abducted could not immediately be dismissed, however, due in part to the fact that Ruth's father was a wealthy manufacturer, and she disappeared during the Great Depression. If other people on campus were not aware of Mr. Baumgartner's wealth early on in Ruth's time at Ohio Wesleyan, they certainly would have realized it shortly before Ruth went missing when she brought her brand new convertible to campus. No ransom calls were ever received, however. A witness came forward with an account that could potentially support either of these theories. A woman living near the Olentangy River, not far from the Ohio Wesleyan campus, said that she heard 3 screams sometime between 2 and 3 a.m. on May 5th. This could have been Ruth struggling against an abductor. However, the witness said that the screams sounded like they were coming from a hysterical person, so they could have been coming from Ruth in the middle of a mental break. In either of these scenarios, it appears that Ruth left her dorm room willingly, as there was no sign of a struggle inside of it. If she had been abducted, her abductor would have needed to lure her outside. In the weeks before she went missing, Ruth had received numerous calls on the dorm's communal phone from an unknown man. On several occasions, other students living in the dorm had answered the phone. They described the man on the other end of the line as having a high-pitched voice. Ruth was not always in the building and available to come to the phone, but she is known to have taken at least 2 of these calls and seemed happy after speaking to the unknown caller both times. This, of course, led speculation that Ruth had run off with a secret boyfriend. Ruth's family and friends rejected this theory because she was happily engaged to a man named Bud Moorback in Lakewood. There were several unconfirmed sightings of Ruth alone in Delaware and other nearby cities in the days after she went missing. But there were also unconfirmed sightings of her hitchhiking with a young man, leaving open the possibility that Ruth had chosen to be with a man her parents may not have approved of and left her life behind to be with him. However, she would have had, at most, only about $5, roughly $87 in today's money, once she left. Alternatively, she could have thought she was running away with someone she loved, but the person she was meeting actually had criminal intentions. News of Ruth's disappearance spread across the country, and potential statings of her were called in from seemingly every state. The notoriety of Ruth's case did complicate it because it brought forth leads from people just looking to entangle themselves in the popular news story. At least one woman on the East Coast, and possibly a second, went to the police falsely claiming to be Ruth. In 1938, Booker Johnson, who was being charged in an unrelated crime, claimed to know what happened to Ruth in a bid to get a reduced sentence. He claimed that he and his 3 co-defendants in the case had picked up Ruth, who had thought she was going out on a date with one of the men. They then drugged her and trafficked her. This story was revealed to be a lie when authorities realized that Johnson and the other 3 men he implicated in his story had all been incarcerated on the day Ruth went missing and had been for some time prior it as well as for some time after it. In 1939, Ruth's parents asked that the official police investigation be closed. This decision opened the Baumgartner family up to suspicion and speculation. Rumors flew that Ruth had been discovered, married to someone of a lower social status, and therefore disowned, or more popularly, that her parents had her institutionalized for some sort of mental health issue and did not want anyone to find out. In a 1940 article in which she discussed the toll not knowing where Ruth was continued to have on her parents, Ruth's sister dismissed these allegations. The Baumgartners had hired the Burns Detective Agency to look for Ruth. It is possible that they were simply unhappy with the lack of results in the formal investigation and did not want police interfering with the investigation of the private detectives. Ruth's mysterious disappearance still remains unsolved. Trisha Writler was smart, bubbly, and loving. The 19-year-old was a freshman at Indiana Wesleyan University in Marion, Indiana. She was majoring in psychology, hoping to one day help put broken families back together again. March 29, 1993 was an unseasonably warm day in Marion. Trisha, an avid runner, went on 2 separate runs that day to take advantage of the weather. That night, however, was spent writing a term paper in her dorm room. Around 8 p.m., Trisha decided to take a break from her work and walk to Marsh Supermarket, which was just half a mile away. There, she purchased a root beer and a magazine. She then began the walk back to her dorm room in Bowman Hall. She never arrived. Trisha's clothes, stained with blood, were eventually discovered roughly halfway between the store and her dorm building, in a tree in a grassy area. An earring and a small amount of blood was found on the nearby sidewalk. A search was launched to find her, with the effort including fellow students from the university. Search dogs were also brought in to look for Trisha. Patricia's father, Gary, believes that Trisha's active lifestyle may have rendered the dogs less useful than they ordinarily would have been. Because Trisha ran so frequently and the search area was so close to where she lived and went to school, Her scent was everywhere because she went for runs all around the area. Investigators believed that 6 or 7 people had been playing basketball on a court near where Trisha went missing, but none of those individuals ever came forward or provided information. The search effort and police investigation did not locate Trisha. Over the years, multiple suspects have been considered in Trisha's disappearance. One of those suspects did confess to involvement in Trisha's case, Larry Dwayne Hall, who is serving life in prison for one crime but has confessed to 30 others. Most of those confessions were ultimately recanted. I have previously covered Hall in relation to the disappearance of Lori Deepis. Like in Lori's case, Hall had newspaper clippings and notes about Trisha's disappearance in his vehicle. Like in Lori's case, he confessed and offered to tell authorities where she was buried, but a search of that area, in Trisha's case near a reservoir in Grant County, Indiana, found nothing. Hall later recanted his confession in Trisha's case. In 2017, he admitted to retired Marion Police Detective J.K. that he made up the confession to get attention. No physical evidence has ever been found to link Hall to Trisha's disappearance. 5 years after Trisha went missing, a red sunset maple tree was planted in her memory in Saybolt Park, near where she vanished. To mark the 25th anniversary of her disappearance, a memorial was constructed on the Indiana Wesleyan campus. Trisha's parents and 3 siblings still go out to dinner every year on February 9th to mark Trisha's birthday. While they do not believe that she is alive, they still hope to be able to find Trisha and give her a proper burial, both so that they will have some answers about what happened to her, and so that they will have a place to go to remember her beyond the memorial on campus. By December 22, 1975, most of the students at Illinois State University in Normal, Illinois had already gone home for winter break. 21-year-old Carol Rolfstat, however, had not yet gone back to her family home in Elk Grove Village, just outside of Chicago. She had a job in a clothing store near campus and wanted to work a few more shifts during the pre-Christmas rush. After work that day, Carol stopped at a bar to meet a friend. They did not stay very long because Carol was traveling back to Elk Grove Village that night. Carol and her friend left the bar together and began walking home. Their routes diverged along the way, with Carol heading to the Delta Zeta sorority house. She never made it inside. The following day around noon, Carol was discovered unconscious outside of the sorority house, badly beaten. It was estimated that she had been there for 12 hours. She was rushed to the hospital but passed away the following day, Christmas Eve, due to the head injuries she had sustained. Police could not find an obvious motive. There was still money in Carol's purse, and she had not been sexually assaulted. 2 members of Carol's sorority had been inside the house that night but reported that they had not seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. An 18 inches long railroad tie was found near the house and was hypothesized to be the murder weapon. The sorority house was close to train tracks, so it could have been a weapon of relative opportunity. A witness came forward saying that they had driven by the sorority house around 10 p.m. on the night of December 22nd and had seen 2 white men, one of whom was carrying a club, outside of it. The witness was able to help develop a sketch of one of the 2 men. They believed him to be between the ages of 18 and 25. Carol's murder was not, unfortunately, her first encounter with violence at the sorority house. On July 16, 1974, at approximately 3 a.m., a man cut the sorority house's phone line and entered the house via a fire escape. He began strangling Carol, but she was able to fight him off enough to get out a scream. He then threw her against a chest of drawers and ran out of the house. Carol suffered a broken nose from being thrown but was not otherwise seriously injured. She was unable to provide a description of her attacker because it had been dark in her room, and he was never identified. An arrest was made in Carol's case in 1977. The suspect, who had a long history of mental illness, confessed to the crime. However, he later recanted that confession, and the charges against him were dropped. In 2000, charges against him were dropped. In 2001, evidence from Carol's case was sent to the FBI laboratory for new testing. Fingerprints were discovered on one of the items that had been sent. What that item was exactly has not been publicly disclosed, and the Normal police have only identified it as a personal item that belonged to Carol. The unknown fingerprints did not match any in the FBI database. They were compared to at least one suspect the normal police were considering, but again, there was not a match. Carol's case remains unsolved, but is still an open investigation. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.